So I asked in one of my shorts drawings, which children's film do you watch the most as an adult? Now normally I can tell when a short question is going to do well and get a lot of comments, but I didn't expect this many. Thanks, I really appreciate it. And also there are a lot of comments about how Beetlejuice isn't a kid's film, which is fair. But keep in mind I think of the questions after I create the drawing short and try to come up with something that best fits the picture. And with the thinking that I watched Beetlejuice a bunch as a kid, and it's PG, I thought what the hell, but also consider the 90s were a different time when I rewatched the crap out of it. In any case, since this is clearly a topic people are interested in, I thought I would name my top 10 favorite kids films I watched the most as an adult. But like I said, the 90s when I grew up were a different time. Things were less, let me put it this way, I was watching Jurassic Park, RoboCop, Terminator, and Predator before I turned 10. And I don't think that was that out of the ordinary for the time, at least for boys. Although my sisters also watched similar stuff, so at the end of the day, genre stuff is so fantastical. Like I was never affected by a T-Rex eating a guy on a toilet, or an alien cutting a guy's arm off, or Ed 209 turning a guy into meat paste. In any case, why don't I start with the films people might have a problem with? Also, I'm going to keep it very succinct and to the point. Number 10, The Fantastic Mr. Fox, which I thought was an easy choice. It's a fun and colorful movie. Yes, some of the story, plot, and themes, while some of it will go over kids' heads, a lot of it won't. And the rest of the story is filled with fun characters, comedy, and action, with gorgeous visuals, and the stop motion animation is terrific. And it's one of my top 3 favorite Wes Anderson films. But recently I learned a lot of people think it's not a kid's film because it has violence, tobacco, and alcohol. Which while it's true, I think a lot of it will go over kids' heads. Maybe that takes it out of the running for a kid's film for some. And maybe that's the case for under 5-year-olds. But I think over that it will play well.
I understand what you're saying, and your comments are valuable, but I'm going to ignore your advice.
The cuss you are.
The cuss am I? Are you cussing with me?
No, you cussing with me?
Don't cuss and point
You're
at me.
gonna cuss with somebody. You're not gonna cuss with me, you little cuss.
With me.
Number 9, The Princess Bride. Again, I can see some saying this isn't a kid's film because there's violence and action, but then my argument would be the whole movie is about a grandfather reading a book to his grandson. And as far as the film itself, I mean it's one of the most quotable, most rewatchable films of all time. And every character in this film, from the old woman that says boo to the weird guy in the pit of despair, everyone is perfect in their roles. Especially Mandy Patinkin as Inigo Montoya, one of the greatest characters of all time, who has one of the greatest revenge stories. And this was at a time when Rob Reiner could do no wrong. From 1986 to 1992 he made Stand By Me, Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, Misery, and A Few Good Men, which is a pretty unassailable run. And it's also written by one of the greatest screenwriters of all time, William Goldman, who also wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And it's a film that has everything.
Fencing, fighting, torture, revenge, giants, monsters, chases, escapes, true love, miracles.
Doesn't sound too bad. I'll try and stay awake.
Number 8, the Ninja Turtles movie, the live-action one from the 90s. It's amazing how much Ninja Turtle media there is, considering it started off as a satire, a parody of Daredevil, but despite humble beginnings, the Turtles' popularity skyrocketed, eventually leading to a movie that I wore out the VHS tape when I was a kid. And despite the Turtles being played by men in suits, the work by Jim Henson is absolutely seamless, and despite what must have been a pain to wear, you wouldn't know it by the action scenes that are excellent, which this along with a great villain, which it's hard to make an action or adventure movie without a great one. The story blends comedy and drama really well, because despite the premise of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, who are trained by a giant rat and fight Shredder and the Foot Clan, but it also has a tone and grit that make it feel more grounded than all the recent Ninja Turtle movies and media. That being said, it's still incredibly funny and appealing to kids. Number 7, Rango. So first I was told this was great by several people. So along with the star-studded cast and director, so I built it up in my mind and really didn't get what it was going for. It took me a couple watches to get in sync with the movie. And once I did, I rewatched it and showed it to other people. It's a 14-year-old movie that still looks gorgeous. I think because Gore Verbinski, the director of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, really knows how to direct the hell out of a film, specifically popcorn films. The movie is incredibly funny and has great action, and the character designs are so unique. Like I've never seen an animated film with such a weird set of critters. And Johnny Depp, say what you will about the man, but he's incredibly charismatic even with just his voice.
Who am I? I could be anyone. I could be the sea captain returning from a mighty voyage to reclaim his mechanical arm.
Number 6. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I mean, what more can be said about this film? It's one of the most charming, funny, and rewatchable kids films, as well as having a great sense of whimsy and imagination. And isn't just a perfect fantasy for a kid, but anyone who's young at heart. And it's one of the best down-and-out underdog stories, considering the kid who only has his family to comfort him. But because he's a good kid and the rest are rotten kids, he basically wins everything not only a kid could want: a magical chocolate factory filled with imaginative machines. And I'm not the biggest musical fan, but the music is incredibly catchy. And of course, Gene Wilder is perfect as Wonka. Gene perfectly captured someone who's eccentric without being off-putting or too over the top. He hits just the right balance, unlike the Tim Burton version. Number 5. The Addams Family movies. The live-action Addams Family movies from the 90s. And I have to put both, which I know some will say it's not a kid's film, but again I think if you're over 5 you'll be fine. They're like live-action cartoons, with comical violence, and so much of the comedy is over the top. They're like the first black comedies a kid will encounter, and everyone is perfect in their roles, especially Raul Julia, Angelica Houston, and Christina Ricci. They're basically the opposite of the normal American family, and Barry Sonnenfeld is one of the most underrated comedy directors, who also directed the Men in Black films and Get Shorty, is firing on all cylinders, with perfect comic timing and excellent camera work.
I'll tell you what, I'll buy a cup if you buy a box of my delicious Girl Scout cookies. Do we have a deal?
Are they made from real Girl Scouts?
Number 4. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. So this is the most recent on the list, which means I'm the oldest, and yet this film is great no matter how old you are. Which when I heard people were hyping up this movie, I thought there was no way it could be that good. Because after the first 2 Shrek movies, I heard the rest were okay to average, including the first Puss in Boots. But part 2 is on par with the second Shrek, and just about any other animated film in the last 10 years. It's funny, it's heartwarming, and the action is pitch perfect. And Pero is a great positive character, which nowadays seems so impossible to do, without coming off as corny or uninteresting, and yet this film pulls it off. And Wolf is also one of the best villains of the last decade. And the other villains, which there are so many films that have a hard time juggling more than one, like Jack Horner, who normally a villain who's this over the top, but somehow John Mulaney makes it work. Same with the Goldilocks crew that turns out to be more than just villains.
No more messing around. Slow, sloppy,
Number 3. Kung Fu Panda. Another film that's incredibly hyped when it came out, but it met and exceeded my expectations. And this was before Jack Black sort of wore out his welcome for me, which is kinda inevitable with a lot of comedic actors. Part of comedy is surprise, but when your comedy persona is being the wild and wacky guy, eventually it's kinda gonna get old. But this film taps into what Jack Black is best at, and he's perfect as the underdog that turns out to be the one. It also helps that the action and the ensemble cast is amazing. And like most on the list, it has a great villain with a cool motivation and backstory, and it's a surprisingly insightful film.
But a peach cannot defeat Tai Lung.
Maybe it can, if you are willing to guide it, to nurture it, to believe in it.
Number 2, Sandlot. This was one of my top films from my childhood, and it was so popular at the time school teachers would play it occasionally. And this is coming from someone who thinks baseball is boring as hell. But the great thing about movies is they can make anything compelling. And this film perfectly captured what it's like to be a kid, and the comedy still holds up as an adult. And so many of the scenes are just so iconic and quotable. And it's pretty well known that kids and animals are the hardest thing to direct. Yet this film does both, and yet these kids feel natural and perfect in their roles. Especially Jet Rodriguez and Ham Porter. Same with the dog, which I love throughout the film. It changes from a monster to just your average English Mastiff. Anytime it's on streaming, I will watch it and get a perfect hit of nostalgia.
Shaw! I was saving it for a good time.
What is it?
Big Chief. The best.
A few moments later.
Number 1. The Incredibles. You were probably wondering when a Pixar film was going to be on the list, and I could have easily put one of the Toy Story films, or Ratatouille, but Incredibles at the very least had to be on the list. It's kind of perfect. It's easily the best Fantastic Four film, as well as one of the best superhero and action films, which I should talk about because, which what I love about animated film as compared to live action. With live action, only the creme de la creme are good, and the rest are just headache inducing or boring. But even average animated films, because they're not held back by the limitations limitations of live action. They don't have to cut every second or feel the need to shake the camera. So at worst, the action is satisfying. And at best, which The Incredibles certainly qualifies, it's top tier stuff. And the screenplay is perfectly written. It has a tight and economical plot with zero fat. It's a masterclass in giving you everything you could want in a superhero/action film, as well as a film about family, with another great villain with an excellent motivation.
You married Elastigirl? And got busy! It's a whole family of supers! Looks like I've hit the jackpot!
So that's my list I whittled down from about 30. Some honorable mentions. I will stick with the less obvious ones, like classic Pixar or Disney films. Nacho Libre.
I want to be a great fighter, but I can't even beat a couple of guys in the street.
Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs.
Everything's made of Jell-O. This piano, those sconces, that ghetto blaster, that Jell-O, that aquarium, that Venus de Milo with your face on it next to a Michelangelo's David, that also has your face.
The Adventures of Tintin. So that's my list. What would your top 10 be? And would you like me to do a similar list, except for TV shows?